With Donald Trump in the White House and Jeff Sessions at the Justice Department, the voices of state AGs are more important than ever, which is why we are proud to welcome 3 of these champions to CAP Action today. Today we'll hear from Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan, who has been a fierce advocate for consumer protections in her home state and nationwide. Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring, who has fought for the fundamental rights of all Commonwealth citizens, including immigrants and LGBT residents. And District of Columbia Attorney General Karl Racine, who has made juvenile justice reform a priority in the district. We're excited to hear from each of these about the past month, the road ahead, and how important it is for Democratic Attorneys General to keep the fight going. So without further ado, I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Vice President of Legal Progress, Michelle Jawando, to start us off. Michelle?
I'm going to head over to the side and we'll put you right in the middle.
Okay, so
All
Karl
right.
has to crawl over us.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Center for American Progress Action Fund. You know what? I will scoot over because I feel like this empty chair, I'm getting a kind of Clint Eastwood weird RNC moment there. But it is always a pleasure to have you back here, and for everyone who is joining us online. It is a real honor. Let me just start with having you both here today. If you think about the fact that Donald Trump has said, you know, we'll see you in court. Well, with you two, he actually will. And that's really, really exciting. If you have questions, we will do a question and answer component at the end of the presentation, but this is going to be a great free-flowing conversation. And I believe the hashtag for today, for those who will follow us on Twitter, is hashtag States of Progress. So again, I'm Michelle Jawando. I have the honor and privilege of serving as our Vice President for Legal Progress for our Action Fund. And I just want to set the stage of kind of where we are. So in the first month of the Trump administration, we've seen an EO that would have authorized torture. He set up a deportation force, expedited deportations, issued an unconstitutional executive order banning Muslims and refugees, the second iteration of which we're anticipating any day. There was the firing of the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates. He rescinded Obama-era protections for LGBTQ youth, possibly violated the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, all while allowing Steve Bannon to be part of his national security team. This is not business as usual. And so I wanted to just start broadly with that as a backdrop and everything that we've seen over the first month of this administration. Where do you even begin as Attorney Generals? Or Mark, I'll start with you and then I'll turn to Lisa.
Well, if the first month is any indication, it's going to be 4 years of chaos. It's just been really incredible to see what's been happening. And you know, for me, as Attorney General for Virginia, my priorities aren't any different. They're going to continue to be the same. I'm fighting for justice and for equality and opportunity for all Virginians. But what's changed is instead of having someone who was a partner in those efforts that we could count on in the White House, now we've got somebody who is very often hostile to those very things. And so there may be policy issues that have to be debated in the public sphere, but if the president acts illegally or unconstitutionally and it harms Virginians, then I will be there to step up and see him in court and protect Virginians.
Well, so Mark's absolutely right. We are in such a different time than I think any of us ever anticipated. And what I would say is that for those of us who deal with what is sometimes chaos in our state, this just ratchets it up. It is the entire country that is impacted. And so a lot of what we have had to do to make sure that, you know, in our states, the laws are followed, the Constitution is followed. It is now a situation where we, as Mark just said, it's no longer that we have a partner at the federal level. We don't won't be able to work with the Department of Justice, may not be able to work with the Department of Education, may not be able to work with HUD. They'll have different priorities. They will have completely, different policies. And so we have to make sure that whatever is coming out of the president, whatever is coming out of the departments, they're actually following the laws, they're following the Constitution. And when they don't, and there is harm that is being done to people in our states, we have to be the ones that are willing to stand up, step out, and speak out, file lawsuits if necessary, take a series of other actions that we also have the ability to make sure that we aren't seeing the complete erosion and the abandonment, not just of our laws, but of our values and our principles in this country.
I can give a concrete example. So it may be that we have to take a legal action and file suit against the president or the administration, as we did in the Muslim ban. But it may also be that we have to step up where we can no longer count on the federal government. For example, in the civil rights area, in the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division has been there for decades to help enforce anti-discrimination laws, to enforce hate crimes. And while I was hopeful that our new administration would continue that bipartisan tradition, from the first few weeks, it doesn't seem that they'll have that same kind of priority. So it may mean that we as attorneys general need to step in and make sure that all people, and for me, all Virginians, all minorities are protected, that hate crimes are enforced, and anti-discrimination laws are enforced. So it may mean that we step up in that role where we have been able to count on the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division in the past.
So you're more hopeful than I was. I was
Try
pretty
to stay
sure.
positive.
That's good. I was pretty sure when we saw, the announcement of who was going to be the new U.S. Attorney General that, all hope was kind of lost, unfortunately, based on his civil rights record, and obviously a very poor one at that. But you're absolutely right. I would only temper it by saying, in the last 8 years, we had a very close and good working relationship with the Department of Justice. But having been Attorney General now for over 14 years, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice was nowhere to be found during the previous administration.
That's right.
And so, quite frankly, we have always been in a position, or we have previously been in a position where we had to be there on the front lines. And so in that regard, I would say that our role is no different. It's just that we are going to be substantially busier based on not just the amount, but also just the level of change.
That's right.
And so, we have been doing tremendous work legislatively in Illinois, and we have some very good laws in place so that, for instance, when the policy came down in terms of the shift out of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice on transgender students, well, in Illinois, we have a Human Rights Act that protects people based on sexual orientation, based on gender identity, and so we do not anticipate a shift in how schools are going to contend with those students.
Well, let me actually stay there thinking about, the fact that we just recently confirmed Jeff Sessions to now be the Attorney General. That was, the Center for American Progress Action Fund, we highlighted over and over issues and concerns with his record. He may be a nice person that you work out with at the Senate gym, but that does not mean he has the privilege and honor of being the Attorney General, especially after Attorney General Lynch and Attorney General Holder and all of the advances that we saw over the last 8 years. But with that as the backdrop, I think many people have questions about what does an Attorney General actually do? That was a question that we frequently got. Well, what is he actually going to be able to change? You're telling me he's not someone that has an agenda where he's putting forth civil rights, but what does he do and what does he control? And so I'm going to bring it down to Virginia and Illinois. Why don't you tell our audience and those who are joining, what are some of the examples of the role of an Attorney General, so what we can do a little education here as well.
Okay,
Lisa.
So, well, let me put it in the context that you just talked about and back to the relationship, right? So it is extraordinarily helpful when we are able to partner with the U.S. Attorney General on issues. And I'm going to give you an example that I think is relevant to what we're seeing now. So when we were contending back in 2008 in particular with the economic crisis, the work that we had been doing for years at a state level to investigate, to hold accountable the predatory lenders, the subprime lenders that were out there, and the other market participants. Ultimately, we were able to bring those cases under our Consumer Fraud Acts, but we were also eventually able to go to the Department of Justice, to go to the Civil Rights Division, to go to the U.S. Attorney General and say, these issues are having an impact across the country. In addition, there are federal agencies who should have been doing the work to protect the people of this country that weren't. But because we had a relationship and a partnership, we were able to work with them to ultimately craft some very—
They were partners in your work.
They were our partners. So I think what we're about to see is a complete shift, right? And so let's use a very important example, right? Voting. And so the Civil Rights Division had been doing an enormous amount of work in terms of voter rights, voter suppression. And now we're going to see potentially, I presume, an abandonment of trying to do voter protection work, and it will become a tool instead to put in place voter suppression. And so that is deeply concerning and something that all of our states are going to have to be looking at, because as a democracy, we should be doing everything possible to encourage every citizen to vote. We should not be trying to put in place obstacles so that people are not able to exercise their right to vote.
Seems like such a basic
Right.
tenet, but it's
Exactly.
such a challenge. Right.
You know, I think the role of the state attorney general is an opportunity to really see how different attorneys general may see things a little differently, and highlights a vision of the office that I brought. As state attorneys general, of course, we're legal counsel to our state, but we're much more than just the government's lawyer.
That's right.
And we're the guardians of the public interest. And as the people's lawyer, yes, we have a responsibility to make sure that the state government is following the law, but we also have a responsibility to protect the people themselves, especially those who are vulnerable, those who are discriminated against, you know, those who really need the arm and shield of the law to help and protect them. And it makes a huge difference what the elected officials are saying and doing. I remember when I first came into office, our marriage equality case was already set on the docket for argument, and I changed the state's position on it. And it has meant such a difference.
And it was nationwide news. We remember
and
seeing it.
And Lisa had led the way, you know, years earlier. And it meant so much to people to know that their attorney general was standing up and fighting for them and their rights. And so that's why, you know, it makes a big difference what the elected officials are doing and saying, and how it impacts people's lives.
And you really do have an opportunity to give voice and to stand up for people who may not otherwise have a voice or be able to stand up for themselves. And that actually is critical right now, to make sure that everybody recognizes that, you know, there is a firewall. We would like it not to be called a firewall.
But you're there.
But we're here. We're here.
But you're there.
And we have significant legal authority.
How do you choose and prioritize, particularly in this this environment where there literally isn't a day that passes that you don't have to check your Twitter, or, you know, I often find myself now breaking into a cold sweat every time I like pick up my phone. I'm like, oh no, he said something else. You know, you get the sweats. And literally every day something is happening. So how do you choose kind of where you prioritize both what's happening in your state, how you deal with the pressures of nationally, where you're seeing things happen every day, and you recognize you are the guardians. So you have this kind of desire to protect people, whether they're in your state or nationwide. So how do you choose?
Well, there's no question that state attorneys general are on the forefront of some of the most important economic and social justice issues of our time. But we also have to be thoughtful and strategic and very deliberate about when we take action, because everything that we do has to be firmly grounded in the law. And so for me, it's about are Virginians being harmed? You know, are there violations of the Constitution and the law that I need to pursue? And for example, with the Muslim ban, I went to Dulles Airport, which was one of the epicenters of the executive order. And I could see firsthand how families were being separated and ripped apart. And it was, hours, days before they were reunited, thanks to a temporary restraining order and a judge intervening. And so when you see that kind of direct harm, and we had students who were visiting family overseas and couldn't get back in. We had reports of people being intimidated and forced into giving up their entry papers. And just really, when you can identify real harm happening in the state as a result of an unconstitutional action, you have to step up.
So this is a great question, and I think we get it all the time in every single forum. How do you pick and choose what to do? And I think for a long time there has been this idea that attorneys general, sit in a room and concoct things to do. Okay, well, obviously we don't need to do that.
Right.
It walks in our door every single day, and so I end up choosing to, put our resources to one area or another based on people coming forward or us seeing what's taking place. And so we then are able to say, look, there is a significant problem here. We have a problem where people are being preyed upon by predatory payday lenders or predatory for-profit schools or President Trump. And then do we have, based on the facts, based on the law, an ability to either bring a lawsuit? Do we need to go to our state legislature? Do we need to go to Congress and advocate for a change?
Think about the different tools.
We have a whole series of different tools. If none of those are truly available, we always also have a bully pulpit. And so come out and be a strong advocate, stand with people, let them know we're there to help. Reach out to other organizations that are working in that same space, working with people, seeing whatever it is that we can do. So there's a whole array of tools. I know people think as lawyers we're bringing lawsuits, but we can also be very, very successful in other ways.
Why did you decide to run and become the Attorney General of Illinois? And I'll start there because I know you've spent time as a teacher, you were in the classroom, you were very involved in your community locally. Could have enjoyed a very long, lucrative practice.
Oh, don't remind me.
But you made the decision to become a public servant. You both did. I mean, you were in the state legislature. You made a decision to intentionally seek this office. And I'd love for people to know why and understand that a little bit more.
So I went to Georgetown here in Washington, D.C., and several days.
Any Georgetown people in the house? See, you can always find a few.
In D.C.
All right.
And so several days after I graduated, I ended up going to South Africa at a time when apartheid was still in place. I was a high school teacher for a group of phenomenal Zulu girls. And from that experience, I mean, seeing what was taking place in that country at that time, the impact it had on those families, and the ability for my students to persevere, knowing that one day, hoping that one day there would be a change to a fully democratic society, that has had the greatest impact on me than anything ever has. I went back to Chicago and I started working on the west side of the city in an African American community, again trying to make sure that the students there were staying engaged in their education, not becoming part of the gangs, not becoming part of our criminal justice system. And those two things really led me to go to law school. I wanted to be a lawyer, I wanted to be able to help people, and I thought the best way to do it was by having a law degree. And so I got my law degree. I was in private practice for a while, but I wanted to be able to help people. I wanted to be able to serve. And I would say that as a lawyer, and hopefully all of the attorneys general sitting on this panel would agree, there is no better way to help. There's no better way to have an impact. There's no better way to make sure there is positive change happening, to speak for those who don't have a voice, than serving as an attorney general.
Mark. Well, Karl Racine, the Attorney General for the first elected Attorney General for the District of Columbia, has joined us at a great time because we are finding out why you decided to run to become Attorney General. So we'll go to Mark and then we'll come to you, Karl, and join in the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I love practicing law, I love public policy, but most importantly, I love helping people. And when you're the Attorney General, you get to do all three of those things every minute you're awake. And I saw my predecessor really misusing the powers of the office. He filed suit against the Affordable Care Act,
Right.
which would have taken health care away from people. He went after a climate change researcher at UVA. And so I saw the powers of the office being used to take people's rights away, to hurt them, to disadvantage them, rather than the other way around, to be used to help them, especially those who are voices. So, people who need somebody as their champion.
So, Karl, the question, and you can also use this or go in a lot of different ways, but I think people often want to know what is the motivation behind the decisions that you make in life. Often the question that you hear, particularly for newer lawyers or those who are thinking about the law, is, how did you get to where you are? And so I think the question that we would love for you to answer is, why did you decide to run to be the Attorney General for the District of Columbia?
Sure. Very briefly, my reasoning for entering public service is much like General Madigan and General Herring, both of whom I must tell you are not only extraordinary public servants, an excellent Attorney General, but these are people who could run for other offices. In Mark's case, for example, he came out with a big decision about, 18 months ago or so, where General Herring made clear that he was going to run again for the office of Attorney General, really eschewing folks who really wanted him to run for governor, because he knows the real impact that attorneys general can have on the lives of everyday residents. As for me, my love for public service really starts at home. I was born in Haiti. We immigrated to the United States in the mid-1960s, came from a authoritarian, dictatorial power there in the Papa Doc days. And so my family was always focused on what we could do in a public way for folks who need it. And certainly having the opportunity to run for office and really stand up an independent office of Attorney General that in time could do some of the things that General Herring and General Madigan have done in their states is a great motivator. And I'll just leave you with a piece of our work. In the Washington Post today, you'll see on the left-hand side of the front page a story about a development that we brought suit against for being a slumlord in the District of Columbia. This is significant. We know there's an affordable crisis housing problem in D.C. Here's what's going on with some of the affordable housing properties. Wealthy landlords and developers with knowledge and intention are going about and constructively evicting poor people by not maintaining the properties so that these wealthy developer landlords can develop the properties into condominiums with a whole slew of new people. And they're doing it against the law. And it's the ability of attorney generals to focus on local laws that impact regular people that motivates, I think, us and what we do every day.
So let's go here. As we're sharing, my great aunt was the first Black woman who was elected to be the Attorney General on the island of Bermuda. So I also have kind of an immigrant history and reason and calling for public service. And I often talk about growing up and being in Bermuda and walking around with these little placards saying suffrage rights. Didn't quite know what I was doing, but I knew that there was this call for public service. This administration, in so many ways, has really attacked the notion of who an immigrant is or who a refugee is. In many ways, we've seen this executive order, the first iteration put forth, unconstitutional. You saw a great standing up and an issue actually between local district court judge, 3 federal appeals court judges, attorney generals from the state of Washington really engage in a way that we somewhat got a civics lesson for, I think, the American people. All 3 of you joined in, and I'd love to find out kind of what was your motivation, why you felt that it was necessary to kind of involve each of your states and localities, and where do you see is the next, what's the next step? we are anticipating any day that we'll get a revised version of that order. But I'd love to know kind of why you each decided to kind of stand up on that issue in particular. I will say the immigrant community thanks you, but that was a decision. Not everyone made that choice. So I'd love to hear why.
America is a country of immigrants. It is our strength, and it is going to continue to be our principle and value, I think, to have diversity and inclusion in this country. One of the things that we did in terms of our response was to really look at the numbers and to look at the impact. And it is such a beneficial and positive one. We were able to show in the state of Illinois, approximately 13 million people, nearly 2 million of them are foreign-born. When you look at the businesses they start, the fact that maybe 25% of our doctors are foreign-born, the fact that you have small businesses that have been opened, how much money they bring into our tax base, there is no question that it is absolutely critical to maintain the vibrancy of our state and of our country, that we remain open and that we recognize that that is what America is about from its very beginning, and that to have a circumstance where we are discriminating against individuals who want to come from violent, war-torn countries and come to be in the United States and have opportunity, we have to protect that. It is a basic American value that the American dream is attainable. And so we are going to work to do everything we can to make sure that America stays America.
That's right.
And so, go ahead.
That deserves a start.
Well, Virginia is a place that is becoming increasingly diverse. And that diversity is a real asset. It's a strength. And as Lisa said, we are a melting pot. This is that's a defining characteristic of who we are as a people, and Americans want to continue to be that beacon of hope to the rest of the world. And we could identify all kinds of, a lot of people were being specifically harmed by it at our colleges, universities, businesses, but it also was hurting minority communities of all kinds. Whenever a group is singled out for discriminatory treatment, it hurts that community, and it was absolutely essential that we stand up for them and for those fundamental issues that we really believe. And we saw a religiously motivated ban that is one of our fundamental principles. Just around the block from my office, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Statute for Religious Freedom, which became a model for other state constitutions and our own national constitution. And so we really zeroed in on the religious discrimination aspect of the executive order. And the judge, I think we all saw exactly what was going on, that as soon as the ban came out, and the judge saw it the same way.
That's right.
And initially I thought, well, there's some ways we can win this on procedural due process, but the more I looked at it, there was a mountain of evidence that it was religiously grounded in religious bigotry. And these cases don't come along very often.
That's right.
Presumably, we like to think our government officials are acting out of the right motives and not illegal motives. And when they do, they often try and cover up their tracks. And so the point we tried to make in our case was it is really important when there's a case of illegal motive and there is a mountain of evidence for the judicial branch to call it out and tell the executive, no, you can't do this. And the judge agreed with us and wrote a really strong opinion.
Wonderful opinion.
Yeah, the only 2 points I would add is that, as it turns out, the Democratic Attorney General's Association was at a meeting in Fort Lauderdale on the weekend in which the Muslim ban order was signed. And so there we were all gathered together with a real issue dropped in our hands. And it was clear that we were going to act quickly and forcefully, and we did. We immediately sent a letter signed by just about every Democratic AG to the Trump administration, asserting that the ban was unconstitutional, unlawful, and certainly un-American. And we promised action. And sure enough, on that Saturday, I think I'm right, Mark, you returned to Dulles Airport and you were right there at the airport trying to lend a hand, bring a sense of real America and calm and fairness to the situation. The second point, as you indicated in your question, what a great civics lesson for the American people and young people to see that, number one, state attorney generals aren't on a detour and frolic when they're seeking to defend the Constitution. We have standing to do so, that there is in fact a neutral arbiter, a check and balance on the system that will thoughtfully consider arguments of facts and law and follow the Constitution. And so I don't know whether you still have your shirt, General Madigan.
I do, but it's not on.
Okay, but there's a new shirt out there that is, to me, it's Civics Lesson 101. Justice is sexy. And guess what?
The T-shirt?
This is the T-shirt.
All right, so we need to get some portion out today. Justice is sexy, and we got to make sure we'll find the URL and tweet it out too. All right, good.
And that's exactly right. And it's important for our young folks to know that no one is above the law. The loudest voice does not win in court, that the Constitution matters, and that courts will, in fact, hold the executive to account to follow the Constitution.
And I would add to that another important thing, and I think what has been troubling, certainly to me and so many people in this country, we're fighting battles, one, we never thought we would have to fight.
That's right.
Two, to the extent they were fought and won, it was 50 years ago. It was even longer than 70 years ago. I mean, we've gotten to a point where, the unreal, the unimaginable is happening. It's become reality. And luckily, the United States, the founding fathers, we have institutions, we have documents, we have laws that should provide those checks and balances. And so far, some of them are working. We would like some of them to be working better. But we can say that as Democratic attorneys general, we are at the forefront and we are going to be working together to make sure that, again, we don't lose the basic American principles that all of us stand for, all of us accept. First Amendment, right? I mean, just last week, right, we're watching even the First Amendment being eroded, but it's been every week.
Every week, every day almost.
I heard Tom Perez. I was down in Atlanta this past weekend for the DNC, and I heard our new Democratic chairman, Tom Perez, remind a crowd.
Was formerly at the Department of Justice Civil Rights
Head of the
Division.
Civil Rights Division.
Right.
Indeed, and worked very closely with many state attorney generals in order to make sure that voter suppression laws are challenged in court. But what Tom was focused on was a comment that the current Attorney General of the United States made when he wasn't Attorney General. And the comment was made about a whole people, people from the Dominican Republic. And the comment was something like, folks from the Dominican Republic can't add value to the United States. Well, Tom pointed out that his father and mother immigrated over, left a dictatorship. Father raised several kids. Father served in the military. Every single kid is contributing to the community. And so this notion that immigrants somehow harm the United States is a myth, a fallacy, an awful lie that can only be used to make people afraid. And it's important for us to speak truth to power.
Definitely, and making sure that we're changing these narratives of a us versus a them. I think at this point, and the time is going by so quickly, we're going to do a few question and answers. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we will bring the mic. We'll start with the lady with the lovely red scarf.
That would be Peg.
Oh, hi, Peg.
Hi, I'm Peg from Wisconsin. Could you guys just briefly discuss the differences in powers and duties among the various states' attorneys general? As you all know, your panelists well know that some of you have parents patriae authority, that some of you have the authority to litigate or prosecute on your own, and others do not. But I think that it's good for people who may be working with state attorneys general to first of all recognize which state the AG is from and what sorts of powers and authority they have. So if anybody wants to make a comment on that.
So Illinois, as the Attorney General, independently elected Attorney General, and folks should know, not all Attorneys General across the country are elected. Some of them are appointed either by a state Supreme Court or by a legislative body or a governor. But in Illinois, I am elected. I am independent of my executive, which has proven to be necessary over the last 14 years.
Very good in your state.
Right. We're still struggling, but we're hanging in there. But I do not need to seek authority, therefore, from my governor in terms of bringing lawsuits. We have a very clear, over 100-year line of cases affirming that the Attorney General, as the legal officer for the state, is the one who is in control of litigation. And we have very extensive authority, and unfortunately, we use it, but we use it in the right way when we need to protect people in our state.
Well, likewise, Virginia is a state where the Attorney General is, handles all civil cases involving the Commonwealth. And I'll also mention that we're pleased to have Karl, who is the first elected Attorney General for D.C. And, and I'm sure there are pluses and minuses that people can talk about whether an Attorney General should be independently elected or appointed by the governor. I happen to believe the independently elected one is the right model, because it is really important for an Attorney General to be able to exercise independent legal judgment and bring that to bear in all kinds of situations. And so I commend the voters of D.C. for making that selection, and they chose a good one.
Well, thank you very much, General Herring. Let me just say a couple things. Peg, the question is excellent, and all we need to do is look over to our neighbor in Maryland, right? A great Attorney General, Brian Frosh, was immediately kind of on the sidelines with respect to some of this Muslim ban litigation. Why is that? The reason why he was on the sideline is because in Maryland, the law was that the Attorney General would need to have the approval of the governor to sue the federal government. General Frosh's governor was not answering his calls when Brian sought approval. So what General Frosh did was he went to the legislature, and sure enough, the legislature just last week gave General Frosh the authority to sue the federal government without the approval of the governor. So the powers of the Attorney General are extraordinarily relevant, jurisdictionally so, to what Attorney Generals can do. The last thing I want to note for folks here who may be residents of the District of Columbia, I've got to tell you that Attorney Generals throughout the country, including Republican Attorney General, were extremely helpful and are helpful on an ongoing basis to the Office of Attorney General in D.C. They are excited that we're independent and elected, and I don't think that we would still be independent but for the help of Republican AG and Democratic AGs in the very first months of our independence, when the executive sought to take that away. The reason why the executive failed was because we had, armies of attorney generals, Republicans and Democrats, giving us every argument to make against the take back of our independence.
That's great to hear. Let's go to this side. We'll take the gentleman with the gray.
I guess first to General Herring, but then maybe to everybody. The transgender case, Virginia obviously is in the forefront of that at the moment, and the determination, I guess, by March 1st, the lawyers have to submit to the Supreme Court whether they want to go forward on it. But is that a case that you will get involved in the long run? I know it's coming up through North Carolina. There's the issue there, HB 2. Will that be in the forefront of what you will be doing in Virginia in the next year?
Well, we're currently taking a look at the briefings in the case and to see what the right role is for us to play. I am very concerned about the new administration walking back important protections for LGBT Virginians and Americans. From the very first day I took office, I changed the state's position on marriage equality, brought Virginia into the fight for marriage equality, and won. After that, there had been an opinion issued by one of my predecessors that said that local school boards did not have the authority to include protections for LGBT students. And I took a look at the law and saw that there was some flawed reasoning, in my view, from that prior opinion, and came out clearly and strongly and said school boards have the authority in Virginia to protect LGBT students. And so we need to continue to work to protect them. And as the federal government begins to pull back protections, we at the state level need to push back against that and make sure that all Virginians and all Americans know that their rights will be protected and respected. And it matters what elected officials say on these issues. We saw that, I saw a study recently that concluded in those states that moved to support marriage equality, that the suicide rate and attempts went down among LGBT students. So these make a critical difference in the lives of Virginians and Americans every single day.
And AG Madigan, let me also just flag, because another area where we've seen an intentional rollback around regulations has also been in the environmental space. And I know your office has been very engaged on many of those issues, particularly around the Clean Power Plan and our streams and rivers. There was another EO that recently came out about that.
So the perspective I have, having served as Attorney General now for over 14 years, is that when I came in under the Bush administration, there was a group of attorneys general, I'm trying to think if they were all Democrats, they may have been, who were suing the administration, trying to ensure that US EPA was in fact enforcing our environmental laws. Eventually, we got rulings, all the way up to the Supreme Court saying that, yes, there need to be regulations on greenhouse gases. And so then when there was a change in the administration, instead of, fighting against the Bush administration, we were aligned with the Obama administration and US EPA trying to move forward. And so now what we're going to, we presume we'll see, it'll be a flip. So we'll be on the other side of the V again, but it'll be necessary work to do because the impact that we're seeing of climate change is very significant, and we certainly, I have to tell you a quick story, and I apologize. I have 2 daughters, and
I have 3. I one-upped you.
Bless you. I don't know how you do it. But my 12-year-old said to me just within the past week, she said, "Mom, when is the planet going to die?" And I looked at her and I said,
she's 12.
And she's 12. And I said, you know what? I said, there's already some terrible things happening in terms of weather events, in terms of species extinction. I said, so my hope would be that it'll be after you're dead. But I mean, that, we're looking at a time frame that, is short, and that the impact that so many of these decisions have, they're being felt by young children who see what's going on and see this terrible model, and we try to raise them right, and then they're exposed to the complete opposite of what we were hoping for them in their futures.
Yeah, Peter, to your excellent question on transgender issues, look to what AGs are already saying about the issue. I think if you go to the websites of many of the Democratic AGs, you'll see statements that came out right after the executive order, and indeed a couple of very, very, I think, well done and persuasive press conferences. And so we certainly are reviewing, the law, and where there's a legal basis to be supportive, we will be. On climate change, I just want to bring your attention to, and I'm sure many of you are aware of the issues here, but Attorney General Schneiderman from New York and Maura Healey from Massachusetts, have sought documents, pre-litigation documents from ExxonMobil and other not-for-profit related companies in regards to their representations as to climate change. Congress is trying to forestall state attorney general investigations, which is, in my view, an obstruction of justice. We're going to be strong on those issues.
I would love to quickly, and we'll get one more question, but also your work on juvenile justice has been noted nationwide. When over the last 8 years, we've seen great reforms in the criminal justice space, even bipartisan consensus. Is that something you anticipate being incredibly aggressive with this Attorney General, with this administration, particularly in the area of juvenile justice reform? You can talk about criminal justice broadly, but some of your work, particularly around shackling, has been just wonderful. So I don't know
Thank
if you
you
want to share that.
for raising that. Indeed, in the District of Columbia, one of the areas of rare exclusive authority for the Office of Attorney General is in the prosecution of juveniles. And so here's what we've done. We created a diversion program that simply was based on making a decision that many, many kids, by their profile, their social history, and indeed the wrong that they're accused of, are likely to get better results, not recidivate, if they stay away from the criminal justice system. So what we've done is we've created a diversion program where these young people get incredible tailored services to help them, and if there's adults in their family that need help, also help those family members. The cost of those services through this ACE diversion program, $4,000 for 6 months of intensive services. What are the results in 2 years? Over 1,000 young people went through diversion who would have been prosecuted. 800 of those young people have not been re-arrested, okay? And that tells you that an investment in core services, mentoring, mental health counseling, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, other experiential kind of services can actually impact young people's lives.
General Herring, I know you're making a major announcement tomorrow similarly, but can you just tease it for our audience?
Is that fair?
Well, we have invested in some cutting edge technology to help in investigation of child exploitation cases. And so this new technology will not only help us as an investigative tool to go after the perpetrators of this horrible, heinous crime, but also help us to identify the child victims. And it will really revolutionize the way our office and other offices who are engaged in this work can partner to work together to identify the victims, to get them help, because those who are victimized in this way leaves scars that last a lifetime.
All right, and we'll take one last question and then we'll wrap. Gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Bert Brandenburg with Appleseed. I'm just curious how each of you is responding to the Sanctuary City movement, given your roles, given the coming standoff.
And then as you respond, or if you choose to, if you could also maybe share kind of your closing thoughts for the audience today. So Karl, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Question from my law school classmate, Mr. Brandenburg over there, runs a fabulous not-for-profit organization. What we did recently is that we gathered many of the not-for-profit organizations focused on legal rights for minorities, immigrants, and the poor, including your local organization. And we studied very carefully the executive order. And what we're seeking to do is provide as much guidance to people as possible as to, what information they can give public schools, charter schools, and give them clarity on the role of local law enforcement. There's a lot of confusion, ambiguity, and fear out there, and we're hearing terrible stories of sufferers of domestic violence not reporting the crime because they're concerned that the police may come in and raid and take family members away. So we're looking to partner and be very active in giving clear guidance.
So we have done some of what AG Racine has done. In addition, what we did was recognizing that the City of Chicago, the County of Cook, have so-called either welcoming ordinances or sanctuary city ordinances. We reached out to our governor, making very clear, as I talked about earlier, the benefits of immigrants in the state of Illinois, but also very specifically requesting, urging him not to enter into any sort of agreement 287G agreement with the federal government to deputize state law enforcement to serve as federal immigration officers. As we all know, and AG Racine just went through some of the issues. As it is, the city of Chicago does not have enough resources to police the violent crime that is taking place. Any diversion of those resources to do federal immigration work is certainly not going to be helping our cause. And so far, we have, the indications have been that there is not an intention to do that, but it is something we will continue to monitor. And in addition, we are also working with the organizations, the civil rights organizations that operate in Chicago throughout the state of Illinois to make sure that they're telling us what they're seeing, they're telling us what they're doing, they're telling us how we can help support them, because we are all in this together. And so we're also working, because legislatively there are a series of different pieces of legislation that have been introduced, Trust Act, for instance, and trying to see if the state of Illinois will become a so-called sanctuary state.
Well, in addition to the tremendous harm that is happening to families that can be ripped apart by the executive order and the potential diversion of resources, local law enforcement really relies on the mutual trust between them and the community to help protect the community and keep it safe. This can make us less safe because it undermines that level of trust. And if I could just offer you had asked for some closing comments, and we started off talking about how it's like every day, there's something else coming out at us that is threatening to so many people we represent. And I'm seeing in Virginia, and I'm sure it's true elsewhere, people really stepping forward saying, what can we do? How can we get involved? And that kind of engagement is really, really important. But one concern I have, though, is will we be able to sustain that? Can we keep it going? We've got elections every year in Virginia. We love them so much. And I will be up for re-election this November. We've got our state elections. And we will go from somewhere between a 70 and 80% voter turnout in a presidential year. And by the way, Virginia went 5% for Clinton by 5%. But we will also have a huge drop-off. Historically, turnout could be between 35 and 40%. So the real challenge for us, I think, is in addition to being sort of on the front lines of those economic and social justice issues as state attorneys general, it's also how can we keep people engaged and make sure that everyone continues in this civic engagement.
Let me add this for the closing thought. We know this president loves to tweet. So if each of you could compose your closing thought in a tweet that you would hope that this president would read, what would it be?
Oh, for him to read. I wanted to motivate us.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm in the resistance now.
I would have
so
him start.
It could be motivate or
start with
resistance.
the Constitution. He can start reading
Read
that.
the Constitution.
Start with the Constitution.
I had a front row seat during the convention when Khizr Khan stood up and challenged the president to read it. I still don't think he's read it.
That's
but,
right.
Based on his actions so far.
I'm with you. Start with the Constitution.
Well, I would say this to the people that are engaged and concerned. It has been so heartening to see people in the streets and making contributions to candidates out of state. We don't have a lot of elections this year. And I would say this. If we stay strong and we stay united and we speak up, we will be able to see the change that we need to take place in our country. The vast majority of the American people do not agree with this president, as we've seen the numbers drop precipitously over just the first month. And we need to recognize that, and we need to use our energy, and that is obviously not a tweet.
That's a Facebook post. It's a Facebook post.
But stay strong.
Stay strong.
Yeah, I would say as well, stay strong, resist, and persist. Do what Senator Warren did.
Yeah.
When you've got something relevant and powerful to communicate to the American people because it will inform their judgment on an important matter, you have the obligation, notwithstanding any effort to shut you down or to shut you up, to speak out. And now's the time to take not only your two best friends who always are out there with you, but get the other dozen people who've not been out yet, knocking on doors on important campaigns, to do that. Because in America, elections matter. We're learning that, aren't we? And I have to say, we've got an important election in 2017, later this year, Attorney General, Virginia. If you're here in D.C., cross the border and go help re-elect Mark Herring.
Right. Attorney General Herring, Attorney General Madigan, Attorney General Racine, thank you so much for joining us all today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.